I married Ethan only a few weeks before this story began. People said this time should feel light, new, full of hope. They spoke like a wedding is a clean start, like fresh sheets, like a morning with no clouds. I nodded, I smiled, I accepted the congratulations the way you accept warm water when you don't want to talk. But inside, something felt heavy. It was not dramatic, not panic, not a crisis. It was quiet, and that made it harder to explain. It was like wearing a coat no one else could see. It didn't stop me from moving, but I always noticed it, even in happy moments. I could not explain it, not to them, not to Ethan, not even to myself. Sometimes feelings arrive before words. Sometimes your heart knows the shape of a truth before your mouth can name it. Fear can be like that too. It doesn't always knock. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes fear walks into your life quietly and sits down beside happiness like an uninvited guest who acts like they belong. Ethan was good to me. He had a calm way of being in the world. When he listened, he really listened. When he promised something, he didn't perform it, he meant it. I married him because he felt steady, like a door that closes softly instead of slamming. On our first trip after the wedding, we drove through long stretches of road and empty sky. Ethan reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His palm was warm, his fingers wrapped around mine like he was anchoring me to the present. But my heart did not slow down. It remembered too much. I had lost people before, through distance, through time, through promises that faded, through departures that were never announced. I had stared at my phone until the screen dimmed. I had made excuses for silence because it hurt less than admitting the truth. Waiting changes you. It teaches you to listen for footsteps that may never arrive. You can keep functioning while you wait, you can smile at friends, but inside, a part of you stays standing at a window, looking down the street. So when people told me, "You must be so happy," I said, "I am," because I was. Ethan made me feel cared for. He made me feel chosen. He made me feel like I could breathe without earning it. And still, part of me was afraid of loving too deeply. Deep love always carries the risk of deep pain. When you've been hurt before, happiness can feel like a cliff. The view is beautiful, but your feet keep imagining the fall. Ethan noticed small things. The way I went quiet when the world got too quiet. The way I checked the locks twice. He didn't accuse. He didn't push. He asked gently, like someone who didn't want to step on a bruise. "Are you okay?" he said one evening. I looked at him and saw how much he wanted the answer to be yes. I saw his hope, and I didn't want to bring shadows into a moment that was supposed to feel bright. So I said, "I'm fine." I said it the way I had learned to say it in the past, quick, smooth, automatic. A practiced answer that keeps other people comfortable. My smile came like a habit, not like peace. I told myself, new beginnings always feel strange, and fear is normal when life changes suddenly. I reminded myself that Ethan was not the ones who left, not the silence I used to survive. Still, my chest stayed tight, as if it was waiting. Joy can feel unfamiliar when you've trained your heart to brace. That night, Ethan fell asleep quickly. His breathing became slow, then steady. The room was dark except for a thin strip of light under the door. My body felt tired, but my mind stayed awake. I listened to the silence, and the silence felt loud. In that room, silence sounded like all the things I had never said. It sounded like people who left without closing the door behind them. It sounded like my younger self promising she would never need anyone again. I tried to count my breaths. In, out, in, out. I told myself, this is a safe moment. Nothing is wrong. But fear doesn't listen to logic. Fear listens to memory. I turned my head and looked at Ethan. His face was relaxed, unguarded. I felt tenderness so sharp it almost hurt. I wanted to believe love could be simple, but my heart whispered, don't get too comfortable. Don't forget what can happen. That whisper wasn't cruel. It was protective. It was the voice of a part of me that learned survival. It learned that loss can arrive on ordinary days. It learned that people can say, always, and still leave. And in that moment, I realized something. Marriage is not only about beginning a new life, it is also about bringing old fears with you and deciding what to do with them. Do you hide them? Do you pretend they don't exist? Or do you face them, name them, and let someone see them? I didn't know how to do that yet. I only knew the feeling, heavy, quiet, persistent. I rolled onto my side and whispered, barely louder than breath, sometimes promises feel heavy. Ethan shifted, his eyes opened halfway. Hey, what's going on? He murmured. My throat tightened. The truth felt too big to carry in one sentence, so I gave him a piece of it. I'm just scared, I said. Not of you, not of us, just scared. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell me to relax. He reached for my hand and held it like it mattered. That kindness made my chest ache. Being heard is sometimes more powerful than being loved. I've lost people before, I said. Waiting hurts more than goodbye, and silence can feel louder than words. He stayed quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that feels like respect. Then he squeezed my hand, steady. I'm here, and I'll come back to you, always. I won't disappear without a reason. I wanted to believe him with my whole heart. I believed him as much as I could. But fear does not leave easily. It stays in the background like a shadow at the edge of a room. It waits for the smallest moment to return. One missed call, one delayed text, one door that closes too quietly. Still, something shifted in me. Saying it out loud, it changed its shape. It became less like a monster and more like a wound, something real, something that could heal. I lay there holding Ethan's hand, listening to his breathing settle again. The room stayed quiet, but the silence sounded different now. It sounded less like emptiness and more like space. And before I drifted off, one last truth rose in me like a light that doesn't turn off. I did not know it yet, but the fear I felt was not a mistake. It was a warning, not of danger, but of truth waiting to be seen. That night, my body was tired, but my mind stayed awake. Sleep hovered close, but it would not take me. I lay beside Ethan and listened to the rhythm of his breathing, slow and steady, like a tide that had already decided where it was going. I whispered his name quietly, not to wake him, but to remind myself that I was not alone in the dark. Ethan. Saying it helped for a moment. My chest loosened slightly. I closed my eyes and tried to rest inside the sound of his presence. Then I heard it. My name. It did not come from far away. It did not echo. It arrived softly, clearly, and close, as if someone were standing just beyond the edge of my vision and speaking only to me. Lena. My eyes opened instantly, my breath caught halfway in. For a moment, I could not move. The room looked the same as before. Shadows stayed in their places, nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. It was not a dream. I knew that immediately. Dreams carry a blur, a softness around the edges. This sound had shape. It had intention, and it was not inside my head. My body froze before my mind could think. Fear does that. It skips the careful steps of reason and runs straight through you. My heart began to beat fast, hard enough that I felt it in my throat. My hands grew cold. The air felt thinner, like it was being pulled away. I told myself to breathe. In, out. I listened again, holding my body as still as I could. Silence returned, thick and heavy. No movement, no voice, just the sound of Ethan breathing beside me. Maybe I imagined it, I thought. Maybe my mind is tired. New place, new life, too many feelings stacked too close together. That explanation almost worked. Almost. I turned my head slightly and watched Ethan sleep. His face was calm, his expression carried no fear, no tension. I wanted to pull that calm inside me and make it my own. I wanted to press myself into the ordinary safety of the moment and forget what I had heard. But fear does not listen to desire. It listens to instinct. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time moved strangely, stretching and folding in on itself. Just as my muscles began to loosen, just as I started to believe the moment had passed, the voice came again. Lena. The sound slid into the room gently, without force, and that made it worse. Sudden fear can be faced, you can react to it, but slow fear crawls inside you and settles there. It gives you time to imagine. My hands began to shake. I sat up without thinking, my body moving on its own. The room felt unfamiliar now, like a place I had entered by mistake. I scanned the corners, the doorway, the window. Nothing moved. Fear without a face is the hardest kind. I wanted to wake Ethan. I should have, but something held me back. I did not want to sound foolish. I did not want to pull him into something I could not explain. I had spent too many years learning how to carry fear quietly, how to keep it from spreading. So I stayed still and silent. I pressed my lips together to stop them from trembling. My throat felt dry. I listened, hoping the sound would not come again. It didn't. At least, not right away. I lay back down, forcing my body to rest against the mattress. Every muscle felt tight, alert. My skin prickled, as if it could sense something my eyes could not. I counted my breaths again, slower this time, trying to anchor myself in the ordinary. In, out. Ethan shifted slightly in his sleep. That small movement felt like permission. I leaned toward him and whispered his name again, louder than before. Ethan. He stirred and opened his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. Relief rushed through me so fast it almost hurt. I swallowed and tried to sound calm. "I can't sleep. I feel strange, uneasy." He sat up a little and reached for my hand. "It's probably just the new place," he said gently. "Sometimes your mind doesn't know how to rest." I nodded because I wanted to believe him. Love often chooses comfort over truth. He pulled me closer, and for a moment my fear softened. His presence grounded me. I told myself this was enough. We lay there together, and eventually his breathing slowed again. I stayed awake longer, my thoughts circling quietly. Nothing else happened that night. When morning came, I felt exhausted in a way sleep cannot fix. I smiled when Ethan asked if I rested well. I said yes. Strength, I told myself, is knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. The day passed slowly. I distracted myself with ordinary things: coffee, conversation, light. I told myself fear loses power when ignored. Still, the memory of my name being spoken stayed with me, clear and sharp. That night, when darkness returned, my body remembered before my mind could stop it. Tension settled into my muscles as soon as we lay down. I did not say anything. I did not want to invite the fear back. But fear does not need invitations. The voice returned. This time it did not speak only to me. Lena. The sound filled the space between us. It was impossible to deny. I felt Ethan's body stiffen beside me. His breathing changed. He sat up at the same time I did. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. But inside, something felt clear for the first time. The fear was no longer mine alone. We looked at each other in the dark, and in his eyes, I saw what I had been afraid to admit. This was real. Fear shared becomes truth, not weakness. That moment was small. No scream, no movement, no sudden danger, but it broke the wall between imagination and reality. There was no safe explanation left to hide behind. We did not sleep after that. We sat together, hands linked, listening to the quiet with new awareness. The house felt different now, not hostile, not alive, just present, like it had been waiting. The night did not end quietly, and neither did the fear. After that night, I kept asking the wrong question. I replayed the moment again and again, hoping repetition would make it smaller. I asked myself what happened, how it happened, when it started. I searched for mistakes in my memory, cracks where imagination might have slipped in, but none of those questions stayed with me for long. The question that refused to leave was simpler. Why me? It followed me through the day like a shadow that did not depend on light. I could be washing dishes, listening to Ethan talk, watching the world move in ordinary ways, and suddenly it would rise again. Not loud, not demanding, just present. Why me? The voice did not feel angry. That was the strangest part. If it had been sharp or cruel, I could have pushed back against it. I could have framed it as a threat and treated it like an enemy. But it wasn't like that. The voice felt tired, lonely, as if it had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally found a place to set it down. That confused me more than fear ever could. Fear makes sense when it has an edge. You understand fear that wants to hurt you or chase you away. This was different. This fear did not rush. It waited. It lingered. It did not demand attention. It seemed to hope for it. I started paying closer attention to myself, not in a dramatic way, in small, quiet moments. I noticed how my body reacted before my thoughts had time to organize. My chest tightened before I felt afraid. My hands grew cold before I understood why. My heart sped up before my mind could name the reason. It was as if my body recognized something my mind was still resisting. I had always believed that understanding begins in the head, that logic leads and emotion follows. But this experience reversed that order. My body knew first, my heart followed. My thoughts lagged behind, trying to catch up. Ethan noticed the change in me. He did not press. He watched carefully, like someone learning a new language from expressions instead of words. When he asked how I was feeling, I hesitated before answering. I did not want to scare him. I did not want to give shape to something I could not fully understand. "I don't think it wants to hurt us," I finally said one afternoon. He looked at me surprised, but not dismissive. "What makes you say that?" I searched for the right words. "Because it doesn't feel like danger," I said slowly. "It feels like intention." Saying that out loud made my skin prickle. Intention implies purpose. It suggests choice. That idea frightened me more than the idea of a random event. Random things are easier to survive. Meaning asks something from you. As the day passed, my thoughts kept circling back to the same realization. This was not a story about being chased. Nothing was running after me. Nothing was pushing me away. The voice was not telling me to leave. It was not warning me to escape. It was calling. That difference changed everything. Being chased fills you with urgency. Being called fills you with responsibility. One asks you to move fast. The other asks you to stand still and listen. I began to remember other moments in my life when fear had arrived quietly, moments I had ignored because nothing bad happened right away, times when my body reacted, but I convinced myself I was overthinking. I had learned to distrust that kind of fear. I told myself it was weakness, anxiety, imagination. Now I wondered how many messages I had missed because I was too busy trying to be brave. Some fears are not warnings to run, they are invitations to listen. That thought settled into me slowly, like dust falling after a long disturbance. It did not bring relief, it brought clarity, and clarity can feel heavy. Once you understand that fear might be asking something of you, you cannot unhear it. You cannot go back to pretending it is only noise. You cannot treat it like a problem to be solved quickly and forgotten. I tried to imagine ignoring it. I tried to picture myself moving on, laughing about it later, calling it a strange experience from a strange place. The image felt wrong. Not impossible, just dishonest, like leaving a letter unopened because you're afraid of what it might say. At night, when the house was quiet, I listened more carefully, not just for sounds, but for feelings. I noticed how the silence changed shape. It was no longer empty. It felt occupied, not by danger, but by waiting. Waiting is something I understand. I had waited before. I had waited for messages that never came, for apologies that stayed unspoken, for explanations that arrived too late or not at all. Waiting had shaped me in ways I did not see until much later. It taught me patience, but it also taught me fear. It taught me how to stay still when something inside me wanted to speak. That realization made my chest ache. What if the voice was connected to that same kind of waiting? Not the waiting that hopes, but the waiting that forgets how to stop. I told Ethan that the fear felt different now, less sharp, more focused. He listened without interrupting, the way he always did when he sensed something fragile. I think it wants to be understood, not avoided, I said. He nodded slowly. Sometimes fear is the only way something knows to knock, he said. That sentence stayed with me. It reframed everything. Fear as a knock, not a break-in, not an attack, a signal. I realized then that I had been treating fear like an intruder my whole life, something to hide from, to silence, to outgrow. But what if fear is sometimes a messenger, carrying something that cannot reach you any other way? That idea scared me, but it also steadied me. It gave the experience a direction. If this fear was a message, then running from it would only delay the truth it carried. I felt the shift inside me before I could explain it. Fear no longer sat in my chest like a weight. It moved. It changed shape. It became a question I was willing to hold. I did not know yet what the answer would be. I only knew that ignoring it would cost me something. It already had. Once you hear the invitation, you cannot pretend you didn't. You can delay, you can distract yourself, you can call it something else, but a part of you will stay turned towards it, listening. That night, as I lay beside Ethan, the house felt quiet in a new way. Not tense, not threatening, expectant, like a pause in a conversation that has not ended, only waited for the next honest sentence. I understood then that fear had stopped chasing me because it never was. It had been standing still the entire time, calling softly, waiting for me to turn around. And now that I had, there was no going back. We found her story slowly. It did not arrive all at once, and it did not announce itself. It appeared in fragments, the way truth often does when it has been waiting a long time. an old photograph tucked behind a drawer, a diary hidden where someone hoped it would be discovered, but not too soon. Simple objects, ordinary and quiet, carrying more weight than anything we had heard that night. The photograph was the first thing that stopped us. It showed a woman standing near a window, her body turned slightly away, her face caught between light and shadow. She was young, but not careless. Her smile existed, but it did not reach her eyes. When I looked at her, my chest tightened in a familiar way. She looked like someone who had learned how to wait. The diary came later. Its cover was worn, its pages soft from being touched many times. When I opened it, I felt a strange respect, as if I were stepping into a private room that had remained untouched for years. The handwriting was careful and steady, not rushed, not dramatic, just honest. Her words were simple. She wrote about days that passed quietly, about waking up and listening for footsteps that never came, about believing that today might be the day everything would return to how it was meant to be. Page after page carried the same hope, rewritten in different ways, as if repetition could protect it from disappearing. She waited, not for a night, not for a year, but for a life. Her husband left with promises to return, promises spoken with confidence, the kind that sound permanent when they are said. She believed them because love often believes longer than it should. Love does not measure time the way logic does. It stretches, it bends, it tells itself stories to survive. As I read her words, my hands began to shake, not from fear, from recognition. I had felt this before, that quiet loyalty, that decision to keep believing even when silence grows longer and heavier. The diary did not describe a dramatic tragedy. It described endurance. Women have waited like this for centuries, for husbands lost at sea, for men sent to war, for travelers who promised they would return before the seasons changed. Waiting became a role passed down quietly, taught without words. It was called devotion. It was praised as strength. History does not always call it cruelty, but silence has power, and often it is not shared equally. In the 18th and 19th centuries, women waited without information, without letters, without certainty. Ships disappeared. Wars stretched on without clear endings. Silence filled the space where truth should have been. Some women were told to remain faithful forever, even when no answers came. Their waiting was honored, but their pain was rarely questioned. As I read the diary, I felt that weight pressing into me. This woman did not wait because she lacked courage. She waited because she had too much love to abandon easily. She waited because no one told her she was allowed to stop. No one gave her the truth she needed to move forward. She wrote about setting places at the table she no longer used, about keeping his belongings clean, as if dust itself might mean betrayal, about listening to the door at night, convinced that one day it would open the way it used to. Her life narrowed around that hope until waiting became its center. She did not stay because she was weak. She stayed because she loved deeply. And love without truth slowly erases a person. I felt it as I read, the way her words grew quieter over time, the way her world became smaller. She stopped writing about herself and wrote only about him, about his return, about what life would be like when everything resumed. Her own needs faded from the pages. Her voice softened until it was almost an echo. That was when I understood something I had been resisting. This was not a ghost story. Nothing here was trying to scare us. There was no anger in these pages, no revenge, only longing. It was an unfinished love story.
That realization changed how I felt in my body. The fear I had carried since that first night shifted into sadness. Not a sharp sadness, but a deep one. The kind that settles quietly and stays. I felt connected to her in a way that frightened and humbled me at the same time. I saw myself in her waiting. I saw every moment I had stayed silent because I thought love required patience above all else. I saw every time I told myself not to ask for clarity because I did not want to seem demanding. Her story held up a mirror I had avoided for years. Ethan sat beside me as I read. He did not interrupt. When I looked up, his eyes were serious, heavy with understanding. He had seen it too, the way silence had shaped her life, the way unanswered promises had turned devotion into confinement. "She did not disappear," I said softly. "She faded." Ethan nodded. "Waiting without truth becomes a prison." Those words stayed with me. A prison does not always have walls. Sometimes it has hope that never resolves. Sometimes it has love that never receives an answer. Sometimes it has silence that is treated as virtue instead of harm. I realized then why the voice felt tired, why it did not sound angry. This was not a demand for attention, it was exhaustion, a presence shaped by years of being unseen. The voice was not asking us to fear it, it was asking us to witness it. As I closed the diary, I felt a responsibility settle into my chest. Not a burden, but a weight that made sense. Stories like hers do not end when people stop speaking. They linger. They attach themselves to those who are willing to listen. I understood then that her waiting had not ended because she wanted it to. It ended because life ran out before truth arrived. And that was the deepest injustice of all. Not loss, not death, but never knowing. This was not a story about haunting. It was a story about what happens when love waits too long for answers.
When we learned the full truth, my heart broke in a new way. Not sharply, not suddenly, but with a slow and spreading ache that reached places I did not know existed. He tried to return. That fact settled into me first. Then the second truth followed, heavier and quieter. She never knew. There was no villain hiding in the story, no cruel intention shaping the outcome, no magic, no curse, no moment where everything went wrong at once. There was only silence, long, ordinary silence, the kind that grows when answers are delayed and then forgotten, the kind that feels harmless at first until it becomes permanent. I felt anger rise, but it had nowhere to land. I could not aim it at him because he tried. I could not aim it at her because she waited. I could not aim it at fate because fate is too abstract to hold responsible. The anger dissolved into grief, and grief settled into something quieter and deeper. Truth did not erase the pain. It did not soften the loss or turn it into something beautiful, but it gave the pain somewhere to rest. Before the truth, everything felt unfinished, suspended, endlessly searching. After the truth, the pain finally had edges. It had a shape. It could stop moving. I sat with that feeling for a long time. I let it exist without trying to fix it. Healing, I was learning, is not the act of making pain disappear. It is the act of letting pain stop wandering. I spoke to her then, not to release her, not to ask her to leave. I spoke to recognize her, to acknowledge that her waiting was real, that her love mattered, that what she endured was not foolish or invisible. I told her that he tried to come back. I told her that she was not forgotten, even if the truth arrived too late. As I spoke, my voice shook, but I did not stop. There was no ceremony in my words, no dramatic declaration, only honesty. I said what silence had stolen from her. I gave language to what had been missing. Truth is heavier than fear.
Fear keeps you alert, but truth asks you to carry responsibility. It asks you to change how you live with what you now know. But hiding from truth is heavier still. Hiding requires constant effort. It demands distance from yourself. Truth, once accepted, allows you to stand still. Ethan stood beside me the entire time. He did not speak at first. His presence was steady, grounding, like a reminder that truth does not have to be carried alone. When he did speak, his words were simple. He said that love should never disappear into silence. He said that waiting should never replace living. Those words settled into me slowly. They connected to my own fears in ways I could not ignore. I thought about the parts of myself I had kept quiet, the questions I had not asked because I was afraid of the answers, the ways I had learned to accept silence as patience when it was really avoidance. In the days that followed, the house felt different, not lighter exactly, but settled. The air no longer felt tight. The rooms did not press in on me. Silence returned, but it was no longer sharp. It no longer carried expectation or threat. It felt neutral, calm. I realized then that silence itself is not the enemy. Silence becomes dangerous only when it replaces truth, when it is used to avoid, to delay, to erase. Without that weight, silence can be restful. It can be space instead of absence. I was no longer afraid of silence because silence no longer meant disappearance. It no longer meant waiting without answers. It no longer standing at a window and hoping a life would return. Silence had changed its meaning. The fear that once lived inside me had transformed. It did not vanish. It matured. It became awareness. I noticed myself speaking more honestly with Ethan, saying things before they turned heavy, asking questions before they turned into assumptions, choosing clarity over comfort, even when clarity felt awkward. I understood now that healing is not a single moment. It is integration. It is allowing the truth to become part of you without letting it define you entirely. The story did not end when we learned the truth. It continued through the way it reshaped us. I carried her story differently after that, not as something unresolved, but as something complete in its honesty, even if it arrived too late for her. Completion does not require happiness. It requires understanding. I learned something I will never forget. Love should never be silent. Silence may protect for a moment, but it cannot sustain a life. Waiting should never erase a person. Devotion that demands disappearance is not devotion at all. And even when truth comes late, even when it cannot change the past, it is still better than silence forever. That truth stayed with me. It moved into my daily choices, into my marriage, into the way I listened and spoke and stayed present. The pain did not disappear, but it no longer wandered. It rested. And in that rest, something else grew. Peace.